again. I'm Jake.
And Alex.
Back at last to the JMC Reviews.
Yep. Just in time for a good October review.
And for today's video, we're going to be reviewing the 1980s cult slasher classic, The Burning.
A legend of terror isn't just a campfire story anymore. He's out there, watching. I will return! I will have my revenge!
A lot going on in this movie.
To say the least. For those who don't know, The Burning is one of the more infamous horror films of the early 1980s, just around the time when the slasher movie boom was taking off. Came out 1 year after Friday the 13th, and at the time was called by some critics a rip-off of Friday the 13th, although the writing and pre-production for the film actually started before Friday the 13th was even released, so I guess you could say it was just a unfortunate coincidence.
You can definitely feel the spirit of that era, though, that lives in this film in terms of the, the plot line, the settings, everything has that same kind of feeling to it, so.
I first saw this film when I was about 14. Watched it late at night on a movie channel at a time where my family definitely wouldn't have approved, but no one was around.
And this is the first time for me.
Completely missed
I didn't
you.
ask my parents for permission for this one, but I think they'd be okay with it too.
You familiar with Friday the 13th?
Yes, yep.
How would you say this film compares to those?
I would say that the Friday the 13th is a little bit more ominous than this one is. When we get into it, we can talk about the main character. I feel there's a little bit more supernatural going on with the Friday the 13th versus this, which is more of a true slasher.
What are you talking about?
A slasher. Couple of kids naked in a lake. Certified maniac on the loose.
And the plot for the film opens at a summer camp called Camp Blackfoot. Interesting name. Where we see a bunch of kids whispering in the dark about how they're gonna pull a prank on the camp's caretaker, Cropsy, played by Lou David, who they describe as a mean drunk who has hit a kid on occasion.
Billy says Cropsy's been getting away with this shit for years. If we pull this off, it'll be the biggest number Camp Blackfoot has ever seen.
They sneak into his cabin while he's passed out, put something on his nightstand, bang on the window, waking him up. When he wakes up, we see... He's so scared that he kicks it onto the bed, which then catches fire, and this prank gets out of hand fast.
Yes, there's a lot going on in that scene for sure. Now, one, Cropsy is described as pure evil, and I don't know how evil he was. I'll give it, he probably a drunk, and he may have hit a kid or two, but you think maybe they would have just tried to get him fired from the camp versus tried to kill him, but I don't know. I don't think they quite established the guy as evil, before some of the things that happened after the burning, but...
The opening scene of The Burning is one of the most horrifying and effective establishments for a slasher killer I've ever seen. And yes, the Cropsy character, as the film goes on, kills some innocent people. But at the same time, despite every horrible thing he does in the film, with this opening scene, I can't help but feel a little empathetic to him.
Sure, because it's definitely something that they probably didn't intend. That bed caught on fire pretty quickly. And of course, having the giant can of gasoline that he stored right by his bedside that then caught on fire also did not help with the situation. That may be a life lesson to all you kiddos watching out there. Don't store huge cans of gasoline near your bed.
Hey, that's not a bad idea.
Yeah.
And then we get this scene in the hospital where we see some pretty insensitive doctors and nurses.
Man, this guy's burning so bad, he's cooked a fucking Big Mac overtime.
Is this their mentor program? Or?
It's a miracle he's still alive.
Not exactly the bedside manner from a nurse or a doctor that I'd be expecting, though. Hey, check out the freak with the burn!
He's a Big Mac overcooked!
No thank you. But I suppose it was the 80s.
As long as you live, you're never gonna see a freak like this.
It is a pretty effective jump scare, though, when...
Oh. Not so jokey anymore, are you?
After getting released from the hospital 5 years later, and when we finally see what he looks like later on, I question, was he really ready to leave at that point?
His insurance ran out. We have to have you leave.
I don't want to see you around here anymore. Beat it, buddy.
After getting out, he encounters a hooker who guides him in, and his face is kept in the shadows. Really do a good job of keeping him hidden and building up the suspense when she finally sees what he looks like. She freaks out, tries to tell him to leave, and then he responds by... While the fire scene was shocking, it's here that we see this film's not holding back with the blood.
And I wonder, was this a crime of opportunity? Was this something he planned? Definitely we start seeing his choice of weapon, even though it later changes a bit from just the scissors on the night table. But it is the beginning of his crime wave.
And his wave takes him to a completely different camp called Camp STONEWATER.
Completely different.
And if you're wondering why he goes to this particular camp, it's because one of the kids who was involved with the fire prank now works there as a counselor. Which seems a little surprising.
I don't think they did a background check there because I'm not so sure he should be around little kids.
Yeah.
And it was described that this camp was located pretty close or nearby Camp Blackfoot. That's another questionable decision to relocate a camp so closely. And then they made a third comment, which I don't think was clear here, in terms of the other camp having burnt down. Did you hear that piece?
Yeah.
And I don't think that ever got clarified in the story.
Well, that was part of a campfire story, so maybe...
That's true.
And remember, he described Cropsy as being, like, pure evil, so maybe he's exaggerating a few things.
Sure.
He seems like the kind of shit that would do that.
Yeah.
Cried out, I will return! I will have my revenge!
I don't remember that part.
Never found.
Creative liberties.
And while the kids go on a canoe trip, Cropsy's true streak of terror begins.
There was a long lull, though, after the murder of the prostitute, and still we start seeing some more action at that second camp. There was a lot of tomfoolery in there, a lot of just camp fun, camp hijinks with the kids splashing around. There seemed to be a lull, and we kept seeing Cropsy in the woods and peeking out at people.
A lot of fake scare scenes.
Yes.
But for me personally, I do think the fake scares were well handled, because you really don't know if it's gonna be him, because he is there, and the great POV shots, which was achieved by putting Vaseline around the camera lens. Are really unsettling, and you just don't know what to expect. The burning is not without a few faults, but the film does know how to build things up and keep you on the edge of your seat.
Yeah, I would agree. It was laid out nicely there.
And the Cropsy character, his killings, they really scared me at the time. And that's something that I kinda give this film over the original Friday the 13th. I mean, the Friday the 13th movies, I like them. They're a lot of fun. But I rarely got scared watching the original Friday movies. And the first Friday the 13th, I found that with constant rewatchings, it kinda loses its, muster. Like, part of what made the original Friday the 13th so effective was the mystery of who the killer was. When you watch it again and again, that whole suspense angle is just kind of gone. And you begin to see it's kind of a dull film. The story's kind of flat, the characters are very generic, and that's something that I think The Burning has an advantage. While it's a little questionable at times, the film definitely has a lot stronger personality than Friday the 13th.
You are serious?
And maybe it's just nostalgic for me. I still kind of feel Friday the 13th as being a little scarier than this one. Maybe when I'm watching this one versus when I watched Friday the 13th and not having rewatched that as many times as maybe you have.
Sure. Why not?
And a big thing that makes The Burning so effective is the music done by Rick Wakeman. The music for The Burning is a lot more lively than simply very electric, very operatic in some places. It's scary, but it has a almost tranquil feel at times.
I'm not going to call it catchy because that's probably the wrong word for a horror soundtrack here, but it does stick with you. I think it's pretty effective in setting the mood for sure. But it's subtle, you know, it's not in your face.
And as for the people behind the camera, we should probably get this elephant in the room out of the way fast. The Burning is one of the very first films, maybe the first film, made by the famous company Miramax. And it is the first major film produced and written, created by Bob and Harvey Weinstein.
Oh, this is uncomfortable.
This film was conceived by Harvey Weinstein after seeing the success of films like The Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Halloween. He worked with his producing partner Michael Cole to come up with a good story idea. Eventually they settled on The Cropsy Legend, a campfire story that Harvey Weinstein heard as a young kid at camp. And eventually, Tony Maylam, best known for making rock documentaries, was hired as director. And it was actually Tony Maylam himself who came up with the idea of Cropsy's weapons being garden shears. And also, Tony Maylam himself actually played Cropsy during most of the kill scenes.
Oh.
Because he felt the actors were not holding the shears the way he wanted.
It's a delicate art form.
The film's story is credited to Harvey Weinstein, Tony Maylam, and Brad Gray, who would later go on to be the CEO of Paramount.
You know, you make violent films, and you make dirty films, and you make family films, but just most of them are not very good, are they?
And the actual script for the film was written by Bob Weinstein and Peter Lawrence, whose only other notable credits are The Real Adventures of Johnny Quest and Thundercats. Very, different type of writing job. And the makeup is done by the master himself, Tom Savini, who had actually done Friday the 13th before this, and he turned down Friday the 13th Part 2 to do The Burning. I'm not saying Friday the 13th Part 2 is a lesser film, but I think he made the best decision, because some of these effects are honestly some of the best I've ever seen Tom Savini do.
Tony wanted a shot of the legs of Cropsy being set on fire. I said I could do that, you know.
Anytime, man. Okay. All right, let's clear this now.
And just because I'm sure some people are curious what our thoughts are, as for the Weinstein's part in the making of this film, I saw this movie when I was 14, like years before the controversy with Harvey Weinstein started, so I have that going for me in terms of enjoyment, but there's a lot of films I've seen that were made by pretty wretched fucks, like Rosemary's Baby, Jeepers Creepers. And I can still appreciate those films for their artistic merit, their ability to scare. There is a lot in The Burning. Like, do you want to give your thoughts?
Yeah, sure. Even though those allegations, like you said, take place decades after this film, it's almost like you can feel those Harvey moments where there's a couple of things that are happening, especially with the male members of the camp and how they're forcing themselves and the female members.
Yeah.
It just got a little too cringy knowing what happened after and knowing who was in charge, the main person in charge of a lot of the story. A psychologist might have a field day with those Easter eggs that Harvey may have planted there, you know?
Yeah, like there's several moments in this film that it almost feels like the Weinsteins were daring people to figure out the truth about them. And that comes from the particular group of main characters.
What's the matter?
Not here.
What's the matter now? You know you want to?
One of the main campers in the film, Alfred, played by Brian Backer, he's the more or less, I guess, protagonist after Todd.
Yeah, it was hard to label if who the main person, because the plot drove through both of them.
You cause any problems for any kid on this camp, bust your ass.
Lay down the law.
On a character who's supposedly under 18. Todd, played by Brian Matthews, who's one of the kids responsible for the prank, is a questionable character. For one, he mentions that he got sent home from camp after the fire prank. Mm-hmm. And even back then, when I watched this, I was like, I think being sent home is the best thing that could have happened to you.
You get arrested.
And then later, he tells a campfire story about Cropsy and what happened, and he says it with an almost sick sense of humor, smile about it.
It seems like he was enjoying telling it, and I'm sure it's not that long ago that event happened.
5 years.
Yeah, and he's telling kids about what he did, almost like bragging about it. So even though Todd is kind of set up as the responsible, redeemed character, at certain points it's hard to like him.
Cropsy and straighten the paint on the walls just by breathing on them.
Considering he's one of the kids that burned him alive,
I wouldn't be telling the story,
It's kind of a sick thing to do. The Alfred character, he seems like he's supposed to be the loner outcast who you're supposed to sympathize with, but he has so many fucking creepy moments in the film. One of them happens very early on where we see this girl taking a shower. At first we think it's Cropsy, and then it turns out it was Alfred peeping on her. And when he's caught, he pathetically says,
I only meant to scare her.
Well, you sure as hell did scare her.
Okay.
and in a weird moment, the Todd character actually sympathizes with him and pretty much lets him off the hook with a warning. He gives a harder time to the people calling Alfred out than he does to him.
You ease up on me, man. He's the one that was caught looking at the girls in the shower. You know what your problem is?
And she has a point.
Oh, man, what's my problem? You can't take anyone your own size.
And I get it, Todd was trying to stand up for Alfred, but I don't feel like there's ever a moment where Alfred, kind of comes out as an actual likable character at all. I mean, he's just, like you said, kind of on the fringes and just a little bit too bizarre.
Yeah.
And his affect, the way that he presents in the movie, the way even, I don't want to pick on his appearance, but the way he runs, and there's something about it there where it's hard to be able to identify with him.
It's like they were going out of their way to make you feel uncomfortable watching him.
And is that a casting issue? Is that a writing issue? What kind of an issue is that?
Well, it's hard to say because Brian Backer, who plays Alfred, he is a enjoyable actor. I mean, 1 year after this, he was in Fast Times at Ridgemont High, where he played a kind of similar but a lot more likable nerdy boy.
I'm in love. You are a wuss, part wimp and part pussy.
Someone commented that he has kind of a Woody Allen persona that he puts on, and I could see some of that here, but even Woody Allen is less creepy than this.
I guess sin would be rooted in the direction.
I'd say more the writing.
The writing, yeah.
Because, think about it, our protagonist is a creepy little dweeb who tries to scare girls in the shower and spies on couples having sex.
Throughout. He's spying throughout.
I think it's clear which parts of the script the Weinsteins wrote.
The kid's weird, Todd. What the hell was he doing snooping around?
Just a kid. Kids do that.
Did you do that? Why the hell are you covering for him anyway?
I remember when I was a kid, I originally thought that the character of Michelle was a bitch and the Glazer character was being just a bully to Alfred. But now that I'm older, I begin to think they were kind of in the right to be pissed at him.
Yeah, to a certain degree. Although, again, Glazer, not exactly a likable character either.
What's my, you want me to talk to him? What do I gotta do, huh? I mean, what do I gotta do?
That's the Harvey moment.
Just cool your engine.
And that sort of thing. You can notice, especially after everything that's gone down with Harvey Weinstein, a couple of the male characters in this film are a bit rapey.
A bit? Yeah. Especially with the other character, can't remember his name, but
Eddie.
There were definitely some non-consensual moments that were a little cringy. It'll never work in Hollywood.
Although, and maybe this is just the Weinsteins trying to cover up their true nature, those characters are not supposed to be likable, and you get the feeling they're being set up to be viciously killed.
Sure.
Are you sure you didn't go just a little too far?
Oh, come on, will you? We had a fight, nothing serious.
How close were you to the victim?
Real close, until the roofies wore off. Then she woke up talking about pressing charges, so I just pulled my tongue out of her ass and left.
I'd say most of the supporting cast did well in their performances, particularly Fisher Stevens as Woodstock and Jason Alexander. By the way, Fisher Stevens, Jason Alexander, this is their first movie, and while she doesn't have a lot of lines, Holly Hunter has a pretty much background role in the film.
I did not know that.
Jason Alexander as Dave and Fisher Stevens as Woodstock. I found him to be funny and enjoyable, particularly the scene where they shoot Glazer in the butt with the pellet gun.
Woodstock? I think you got it. Hey, Woodstock, you're a dead boy, you hear me?
I thought Jason Alexander carried this movie in a lot of the scenes that he was in. And maybe it's just because his voice is so recognizable after Seinfeld, but I thought he was extremely strong in helping move the entire cast. So I enjoyed his performance completely.
Hey, what about this?
What about that? It's like a houseboat for ants or something.
It floats.
It floats, huh?
Dad told you.
Okay, we see wouldn't.
Honestly, I was surprised that he lived, because he's the comic relief. They usually go fast in these movies.
Sure, yeah.
Wasn't surprised when Glazer got it.
No, not at all. I'm surprised it took that long. I didn't see a second person laying there, but that couldn't happen to a nicer guy.
The Eddie character, you definitely weren't sorry to see go, and, well, she was the victim of the situation. The Karen character cried a little too much for my taste. That being said, her death scene was brutal, where he just slits her throat. What did you think of the special effects regarding the makeup?
I thought it was fairly good. I mean, you can definitely kind of feel that 80s vibe to it, but for the time and for the context, I thought it was pretty effective. A lot of good camera angles as well that I think helped capture that even better.
Stuff like the throat getting slit, the stabs in the gut. I thought those were very effective, very realistic, and really made my stomach turn when I was a teenager. Like, even though I can see a little bit of the rubberness to it, when Woodstock gets his fingers chopped off, man, that stuck with me.
That's more the suddenness for me.
Speaking of which, that scene on the raft, that scene actually got the film nearly banned, I think, from England.
Oh?
Like, they had to heavily edit it to let it be allowed, and it actually got the film put on England's video nasties list.
Oh?
List of films that are considered immoral or too extreme for the general public, even adults, that kind of shit.
I guess we've just seen a lot since, because it wasn't over the top, although probably, again, put it in the context, and it was.
Also, interesting fact to note, Larry Joshua, who plays Glazer, you commented that he looks like a 40-year-old man.
That's one thing with the cast. They either look like they were 10 or they look like they were 40. I mean, it was hard to tell what was the intended age with some of them. She's smoking a cigarette? What is she, 12?
Joshua, he was actually older than Ryan Matthews and Lee Aries. And I will say, the main actors, I think, are the weakest part of the film. Brian Backer, he is weird, but I'm not sure that's entirely his fault. I think it's a case of doing what he's told to do. But Brian Matthews as Todd, I just think he's the weakest thing in this film.
I don't know. I just feel real uneasy. Karen will go back to the main camp in the middle of the night.
Every time he delivers his lines, he just sounds so fucking stiff. I'm surprised he doesn't crack.
He's definitely there because of the image, because of the looks. He was wooden in a lot of scenes.
Hence why they show off his man cleavage.
For 3/4 of the film.
And Lee Aries as Michelle, I've seen her in other stuff, and she's not the worst, but here she overdoes the emotion sometimes. I think she definitely had ways to go before she got to Bloodsport.
I mean, I think she's the only female character that really had any kind of strength to her in the film, so you gotta give her a little credit for that.
Yeah.
Do you want to die?
Motivation! And even though he's not in the film that much, what did you think of Lou David as Cropsy?
Again, like you said, it's kind of hard to evaluate that role just because a lot of what you get from Cropsy's perspective is just him kind of leering on the outside and that kind of distorted image. Again, there's no real dialogue from Cropsy, so it's just kind of his motions. Kind of hard to identify him as an individual character. As a villain, I think it's effective because he's kind of like that dark, shadowy presence, kind of terrifying these kids.
And now, let's talk about the big finale, where most of the campers are now dead. Alfred's on the run in his shoulder-jerky way. And Cropsy, for some reason, doesn't kill him. He just pins him to a wall and gags him. And finally, Todd, who I think he would have wanted to kill first, shows up and they have their big showdown in what appears to be an abandoned mine. From what I've read, they originally were going to have the finale take place in a cave, but the cave they found turned out to be full of bats. Tom Savini claims they found a second cave, but right before they were about to film in it, it collapsed.
Bogus!
And it's here in the mine shaft that we get this extremely well done and effective moment where Todd is faced by Cropsy, who's wielding what appears to be a makeshift flamethrower, and he flashes back to the night that they pulled the prank. Again, not exactly sure how to feel about Todd, but this serves as a good reminder. Everything that goes on, it is, about 30% his fault.
Yeah, I would agree. Definitely, he does bear some responsibility there, and he's the whole reason that Cropsy's at this camp. He endangered these kids.
And as for the other kids that were involved, I guess they moved out of the state.
Yeah, that's another thing with this film. Why does Cropsy not go after the other kids? Just the availability of Todd? I wish the film had included, like, all of them running the camp, you know, kind of a deal like that instead of, why just Todd? Maybe it's their community service. I don't know.
But yeah, Todd faces off against Cropsy, and we finally see what he looks like at the end.
Yeah, clearly.
Oh my god, that is still horrifying.
Yeah.
Apparently, it took 3 days for Tom Savini to do that makeup, and he had to do it pretty much on the fly. He said he was not happy with how it came out, but I don't know, I still think it's pretty gruesome and turning to look at.
Yeah, I think it works as a burn victim remembering the story. And I think in that whole final scene, I think the continuity in that plot line where he pulls the flamethrower back out, the flashbacks, I felt like that was good editing. I don't like everything about the final scene, but I thought that those elements worked well.
I agree.
And Alfred, in what I guess is the moment where the audience was supposed to root for him, stabs Cropsy in the back. And just as he and Todd are about to leave, Cropsy comes back Jason style.
Oh.
Yeah, Alfred's got some serious fucking problems. Then we get a second and very bizarre final campfire scene where a character who I think is completely new is telling, I guess, a new version of the story, but I guess they incorporated the film story into it. Mm-hmm. And at this point, anybody who tells a campfire story should die.
Yeah, it was kind of a weaker moment, I thought. It's just, it doesn't leave you with that fear that they're still kind of mocking this event where, again, another 8-10 kids ended up dying and they're talking about it around the campfire.
He lives on whatever he can catch. He's the law.
Is this a different crop of kids?
Yeah, I don't know who the fuck this guy is.
This is revenge.
Has their story become its own campfire story?
This kid is dead to him.
I think at this point, you don't tell the story anymore.
Don't move. You're dead.
Well then.
That's all that happened. That's the end of the story.
So, all in all, did you enjoy watching The Burning?
Yeah, I thought it was generally more positive than negative. Again, I think there's some holes in there and some of the casting issues, you know, the strength of the cast was questionable in some spots, but I think there were enough nuggets in there to make it definitely a good watchable film there.
It is actually scary, which is a good point for a movie like this to have. The music is spine-tingling, and while the characters can be a bit unlikable and, yes, a bit rapey at times, they do have personality, and you can't say that a handful of these characters aren't developed. That means something, like, that goes a long way.
Sure. Why not?
The few other cons I have are more technical. The campfire scenes, I really didn't care for those, just the way the guy whispered each time. And with the exception of those campfire scenes, every night scene in this movie is day for night.
Yeah.
No, he does. These people banks.
Does that look like nighttime to you?
Then he lights him. Leaves him in front of somebody's.
But if you want to see a movie that's gritty, takes no prisoners, then The Burning is for you. This is at a time where the MPAA had not quite cracked down on slasher movies and they could still get away with a little extra carnage. Definitely a good Halloween movie at least.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Especially for the time.
And if the Weinstein Brothers Association bothers you, too bad. I still like it, and I'll probably watch it again someday. And great to have you back,
No, it's good to be able to watch something different.
Yeah, like Death Sport. Anyway, hope you enjoyed our review, and I will see you again very soon with another 1981 horror cult classic.
All right, enjoy.
You look like an avocado. Had sex with an older, more disgusting avocado. Not gently, like it was hate fucking. There was something wrong with the relationship, and that was the only catharsis that they could find without violence. You will die alone.
That'll do.